You are listening to Eastman's Flycast, an adventure fly fishing specific podcast covering travel, tactics, and next level insight. Now your host, Brian Barney.
Hey, what's happening, guys? Got a brand new Eastman's Flycast for you. So this week I have on Derek Olthuis. I just met Derek. I met him through his social media, and then he runs Trout Academy, and asked him to be on the podcast. And what a great podcast it was. He is so knowledgeable and then just so humble, and he's got a great delivery to his knowledge or to his information. Just an amazing conversation. We talk about fishing Stillwater. He produces some amazing trout in Stillwater, and I really need to focus on it more. And he shares his tactics, shares some of his secrets, and just how he goes about fishing for these things. And he fishes to them a lot by sight fishing, which, if you've ever sight fished for any species of fish, it's one of the most exciting things you can do. Seeing that fish and targeting them and making that high pressure cast, and then getting them to follow and getting them to take. And so just an amazing conversation. And then, you know, I just we get into the technical side of things as I ask questions about leader length, leader weight, fly selection, color, reading the water, just a bunch of questions. I'm just fascinated by it. And then the conversation drifts to fishing for Arctic Char. And Derek's just done some amazing trips in the Arctic. And I fished for Arctic Char, and I've dreamt about him a lot. I fished for him for just a couple days. I was up there caribou hunting and able to mix in a raft trip and go fish for these Arctic Char. And I wasn't able to come up with one, but talking to Derek about what he looks for as far as, you know, these fish and how they live in the Arctic. And he talks about how they have to winter in the lakes, and so he's always looking for these lakes with river systems that connect to the ocean. And he talks about the research, he talks about the tactics, he talks about the fish themselves. Just an amazing conversation. So I can't thank Derek enough for coming on the podcast. It's a great one. I enjoyed it. I know you guys are going to enjoy it too. I want to thank Eastmans for support of this podcast. Make sure to check out everything we have going on at Eastmans. We've got the Eastman's Bow Hunting Journal, Eastman's Hunting Journal, the two magazines, Eastman's Outdoor Channel, that's on, or Eastman's Hunting TV on the Outdoor Channel. We also have Beyond the Grid, which is an internet TV show. I've got the hunting podcast over there, Eastman's Elevated. This week on Eastman's Elevated, I have on a couple of my favorite people, the Lampers, Ryan Lampers and Hillary Lampers. They run the podcast Hunt, Harvest, Health. Really helps bridge the gap between hunters and nutrition, and it's just a great podcast. They're great people. So we just had an authentic conversation this week on Eastman's Elevated, and some more exciting news from that podcast is I get to give away a free Matthews Traverse bow. So follow the Eastman's Elevated, check out that podcast, and then we have you can text 22828. Text free bow to that number and follow those pages, and gets you entered in for that free Matthews Traverse we're going to give away. So it's just awesome that Eastman's teamed with Matthews, teamed with that Eastman's Elevated podcast, and able to give away a bow to one of the listeners. So it's a great podcast. I love doing it. Make sure to check that out and everything else that we have going on over there at Eastman's. And with that, man, I've been fishing here. I've been getting out. Got down to the Henry's Fork, fished that like last week or a handful of days ago. Salmon fly's still going off. I got a couple takes. First fish on a salmon fly, so that was really fun. Just kind of missed the major pulse of the hatch, but that's how it goes with that thing. And Madison's been dirty around here. It's been muddy. It's finally starting to drop and clear. It's looking pretty good, really. Ran over and fished a smaller stream yesterday. And went down low on it, and it was muddy, and then went higher on it. It cleared up, and able to get some good fishing on there. Got 4 or 5 fish to eat a streamer. So I've been having fun fishing around and enjoying doing this podcast, including this conversation with Derek today. So it's a great one. Let's get right into it. Derek Olthuis, Eastman's Flycast. I'm your host, Brian Barney. Here we go.
Yeah, so I'm live here with Derek. It's just a treat to have you on. So, yeah, we were just talking about Northwest Montana and being raised up there, that's just a mecca for fly fishing. So you had to have a fly rod in your hands pretty early.
I did, yeah. I got real lucky. I grew up on a lake, actually, right outside of Glacier National Park, and my uncle was a tire for a commercial tire for an Orvis store. So when I was 8, he actually introduced me to fly fishing on the Gallatin and all the rivers down by Bozeman, and I just fell in love with it. So for my 8th Christmas, my parents gave me a fly rod, and I just fished every day that I could, just walked outside my front door and there was a little lake there, and any chance I got to hit any of the local rivers and creeks, I was on it, all about it. So,
Man, that's so
pretty
cool.
awesome place.
Yeah, I'd say. And those mentors, it's not that you can't get into fly fishing without mentors. Today's the information day and age, but it's so nice when somebody takes you under their wing and really shows you, like your uncle taking you down to those rivers in southwest Montana had to be just a giant adventure for a kid. And then to have somebody that's knowledgeable and put you in the front of the boat and start teaching you about the ecosystem, and especially a kid that loved the outdoors so much. Man, that one trip could have sparked, your whole life that you now dedicated to fly fishing, just from that one trip as a kid. It's pretty wild.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I 100% think that trip down to visit my uncle and me fly fishing changed my life. And I mean, it has just kept me outside and exploring all over the world my whole life. So it's been a huge, huge thing for me.
Man, it looks like you've been on some amazing adventures, and then you're just returning the favor. Like, gosh, you've got one of the best social media pages out there, just so much great content. But now you're really giving back with, like, I see you have a bunch going on with Trout Academy. Like, explain that for me real quick, Derek.
Yeah, so I just got to a point with Instagram where I just kept thinking, it's got to be more than me trying to hype me up. It's got to be more than me holding up big fish and trying to convince everybody somehow that I'm cool because I can catch a big fish or whatever. So I got the idea with Trout Academy to do something where I could maybe share my knowledge and, use my Instagram platform for something better than just showing off a picture of me holding a fish or whatever. And, so I started Trout Academy and started trying to share any of the knowledge that I learned while I was guiding or out on a fishing trip or whatever, just to kind of, give back and make it about everyone, not just about me. So it's been a really cool, positive thing, and it's kind of grown and morphed, and it's been awesome.
Man, how cool. Yeah, those things do kind of evolve as you start doing them, and then you have another idea that takes off. But man, that's great. Like, helping out and giving back to the community, because it's the bar for entry for fly fishing, a lot of guys are intimidated by it, and you're right. It's like this where you always keep learning and you always keep growing your knowledge base, and the more you know, the easier it is to get into those fish and have those quality days. And so, man, sharing that information for guys that are new to fly fishing, or even experienced guys, to pick up tips or to get ideas for like a new blue collar adventure. You've been to so many wild places fishing for so many different fish, but a lot of that's, all of it's obtainable for the average guy, if he sets a budget or wants to go to these places, and then just enjoying what's right around us. Like, I live in a pretty neat place, I'm in southwest Montana, but it seems like there's good fishing, across the west and across the country for that matter. And so just with that knowledge base, you can go out and enjoy Stillwater or high mountain lakes or the river systems around. And there's no better way to spend the day than out fishing. So, man, that's great. That's awesome. I'm glad it's doing so well.
Yeah, it's been a super fun thing. And, kind of to what you're speaking of here. As I've traveled, I've been super lucky, and I've got to travel all over the world fly fishing. And something that I've come to realize, the more that I travel, the more that I'm in love with the American West and the Canadian West. And there's just endless places here to explore. I mean, you can have an adventure here that's just incredible. And not that other countries aren't amazing, and, I have no plans of stopping travel. But with that being said, a lot of guys, think that whatever country is the place and it's so amazing, and there's great fishing all over, but it is really tough to beat the American West, and that, all up into Canada. There's just so much here, and we're so lucky to have so much accessible to where we can really go wherever and create the adventure that we want, where in a lot of countries you just can't do that.
Man, yeah, that's really cool to hear from a guy like you that has traveled so much. That you appreciate the West and the United States and what we have to offer. And you're right, there's so many great adventures, and it's open to nearly everybody. Gosh, you can find that you can find those waters that not many guys fish, and less pressure, and it can just grow giant trout or good numbers. And then some of the hatches, out west, to catch some of these fish on a dry fly is just so cool. But then we've got the coast too, steelhead on the west coast. That's it's not like you gotta book a hole for the day or book a river, or it's privatized. Like, it's public out there, and with a raft and a little bit of know-how and some time, you can start figuring it out, and you might even get to touch one of those ghosts from the sea. So yeah, man, it's just it's a really cool place to live, isn't it?
Oh, yeah, I can't think of anywhere better than, the Western United States or Canada. There's just so much variety in these places. I can't think of another place in the world that has the kind of variety that, we have at our fingertips. There's literally, dozens and dozens of different species that can be caught in various different ways on the fly. You're saying, you can go down to the coast, you can swing for fish, you can fish brown trout on mice at night, you can fish dry flies for rainbows or native cutties. I mean, you can go throw a popper to bass. And there's just literally so many different types of fly fishing and experiences that we can create here. It's incredible. And really, every time I come back home and get a drive around the West, I just feel so lucky to live here.
Man, that's great. Where are you located now, Derek? Where do you reside at?
So we're living in Utah right now, in Orem, Utah.
Gotcha. Man, yeah, so living out in the West, and you get some good weather there too, probably starting to warm up and getting some good hatches, huh?
It's real warm here, and yeah, we're getting lots of good hatches, and spring is my favorite time of year because I can jump up into the high mountains as they're opening up and fish ice off. I can fish lowland stuff, and we have great hatches going on. There's just a lot of variety right now, and fish are hungry and willing. So yeah, this is a great time of the year.
Hungry and willing and good water. Yeah, I love this time of year. Spring is my favorite too. It's also when I get the most time to be out too. Yeah, you talked about ice off. I don't know. It seems like maybe I've just spent my time in rivers, and I love the flow of rivers and trying to dissect them and the different ways to fish it. Like you're saying, Stillwater's been a little bit tougher for me, and I just haven't spent the time doing it. I've got some buddies that are really good at reading Stillwater, so I'm really trying to spend more time, on these lakes and learning the different tactics to where I can get into them consistently, because Montana has so many great lakes, and those lakes can grow just giant fish, So it seems like those lakes, that ice off is a great time of year to fish them, right? The fish are hungry.
Oh, it's an amazing time of year. if you can time it and hit it right, I think that's one of your best times to catch a big fish. And it's just a lot of fun. Those fish will come and cruise that ice edge. And if you throw a fly by it, you can get them to duck out from underneath the ice and slam your fly. And then as the ice recedes, a lot of those fish will move right in the shallows, for that warmer water, and they cruise along weed beds, and you just have a lot of big fish that are accessible. And for me, I really love sight fishing. I'm not much of a blind cast type of guy. I really want to see the fish. I want to watch it. I want to try and stalk it, get into position. And for me, this time of year with the lakes icing off and then those fish moving in shallow is one of the most fun times of the year, where you can see real big fish and real skinny water, and it's just a blast.
Oh man. Okay, so yeah, you like to sight fish them. I love being able to sight fish. So you're getting up on those high banks, trying to get a window into that water, and then find a big fish cruising and throw it to him. So it sounds like a lot of times that ice is coming off, like you're trying to strip by those fish. You using a sinking line most of the time and throwing out and trying to get it in front of that fish, like or are you fishing a floating line?
Most of the time I'm fishing a floating line. I think it just gives me a lot more versatility. Oftentimes I'll have a sinking line in the truck with me, and I can switch things up if I need to. But I would say the majority of time that I'm on a floating line, just so I can be more versatile.
And are you fishing from the shore a lot, or do you float tube these lakes?
I float tube some of them. I've got a water master that I blow up and carry into places and throw it on some of these systems. But I really prefer my feet on the ground if can be. I just like being able to move around and stuff a little bit without feeling confined in the boat. But where needed, I'll throw that water master in. It's a great tool.
Man, yeah, that's awesome. So, like when you're seeing these fish, are you having to, or are you nymphing to them a lot with like an indicator and chronomids, or maybe a leech or something, or are you trying to tie on a longer leader and then strip in front of these with that floating line?
Occasionally I will fish a chronomid under an indicator. It's super, super effective. My favorite thing to do, though, is if I'm going to fish a chironomid, I like trying to find weed beds where the fish will come in and cruise along the weed bed, and I can actually get a visual on them. And then I'll throw on that the New Zealand style indicator, where it's kind of a yarn indicator, so it lands real soft, and put a chironomid on underneath that. And then I'll try and watch where that fish is cruising and make a cast that's 25 feet in front of him on his cruising path there, and try and get the fly to sink down to him. And that way it's a real stealthy approach, but I hopefully can get in that fish's path or line of vision. He's going to see my fly and eat it. And if I'm fishing chironomids, that's my preferred method. I'm not much into just staring at a indicator or a bobber, but I'm most of the time I'm using some kind of a small leech, or maybe a scud, or a little bait fish pattern that a couple inches long, nothing too big, and just trying to find fish that are moving around, hungry, looking for a meal, maybe a damselfly, and throw it out in front of them and let it sink a little bit, and as they're within 10 feet, give it a little action so it catches their eye. And any time that I can see a fish cruising around and really try and put the stalk on him, that is my game. That's what I love more than anything in fly fishing.
Man, I can see why. Like, even listening to you, like, it sounds so thrilling, like, to be working those banks of that lake. And it's wild, like, even the West, like, fly fishing's popular, and part of the deal is, you know, there's guys going down on a drift boat and a lot of guys trying to do the same thing we're trying to do, you know, and so, which is great. And you can get your own experience on the river, but I really think with those lakes, there's so many still waters that are, underutilized to where you can really go out and find your own experience. And so hearing you talk, like I can almost picture myself working some of these lakes that I fish that I know there's big ones, like stalking and looking for these fish. And then I can picture like seeing that fish and how excited I am because I'm looking at a 25 or a 26-inch fish cruising that lake shore. And then like I love those like high pressure casts, right? So you've got either the Yarny and the chronomids or a 2-inch bait fish, which I love, by the way. And so then you're down there trying to make this high pressure cast, trying not to get hooked on the, you know, the limbs behind you and trying to get it out in front of them or trying to get to them. Yeah, and it sounds like that's where you shine, where you spent a lot of time doing it. That experience and time on the water is such a big teacher, and I think I just need to spend more time on my Stillwater.
Yeah, I mean, Stillwater is super underutilized in fly fishing, but it is one of the most fun places to fish. I mean, rivers are great. I still love rivers, and when I fish rivers, I do the same thing. I walk up the bank, use the high banks to try and spot fish, and let them do their thing for a little bit where I can observe them and see what they're doing, how they're reacting, you know, and moving around. That way I can kind of get an idea of what they're feeding on, and then I'll, you know, make my move from there. But lakes are just a blast, especially in the spring. Once that ice comes off, you know, it's pretty surprising what fish will cruise in. There's a local lake here that I fish, and it's got a little shelf on it, and it comes up from about 15 feet into about 3 feet of water, and those fish will move on to that shallow shelf right there along the deep water. I mean, you'll see fish that are like 28 inches, you know, wow, 22 inches, whatever it is. And they'll be cruising right along that shelf in 3 feet of water, 2 feet of water. And, you know, if you're stealthy and you make a good cast and you lead the fish properly and everything, you'll get fish that will chase down your fly, or, you know, they'll come over and rise up to eat your chironomid, you know, right below the surface, maybe a foot or so below the surface. And just seeing a fish, you know, a 22-inch fish or 24-inch fish, whatever it is, come up and eat your fly that way, your heart is just pounding out of your chest. And I mean, to me, it is just the most fun thing that I can possibly do is watch that fish. And a lot of times it ends up in heartbreak where they reject you, or, you know, it just doesn't work out. You spook them or whatever. But, you know, that, like you're saying, that high pressure situation where it's do or die, you got to catch this fish or he's going to get away, just is so thrilling to me. I love it.
God, that's so cool. Well, and I love fighting fish when they have a water column like that. Like, it really feels like they have depth. They have like a different way that they can run and go. It seems like you get to really feel the fish on the fight too.
Yeah, definitely.
Man, that is really cool. Yeah, I like that. I like your sight fishing tactics too. So how good would you say these lakes are? Like, after ice comes off, will you continue to fish them into the summertime and tactics change, or do you just like this window of time where it's really good and those fish are hungry, and then from there you move on to something else?
I'll move on to other things. You can really fish a lot of these lakes throughout. But things definitely change. I mean, you have a window, like you're saying, where it's really good. The ice starts peeling off, and those fish kind of hug the ice at first, and then, you know, they start getting a little braver, and then as the ice is completely gone, they move real shallow, and, you know, you've got maybe, depending on the lake and the elevation, a month or two where it's just really good and fish are in shallow, they're feeding heavily. And then as it gets real warm, oftentimes fish will, in lakes at least, will drop down into deeper water. And there's that breakup of the water column called a thermocline, where because of the densities of water, that colder water will sink down and it will create a visible barrier if you're underneath snorkeling or scuba diving. And that thermocline is a great place where fish will just kind of tuck under that and sit in that cooler water where it's more comfortable for them, and then as needed move out of it to feed. So, real hot summer days, you're probably gonna on a lot of these lakes that, don't have maybe a consistent spring or something, you're gonna see fish that are sitting a little deeper. And so your sight fishing isn't, an option, or might not be as good. It might only happen during a hatch or, morning or evening. And then during the day, those fish tuck back into that thermocline. But for a month or two, depending on the lake, it can be an absolute blast to see those fish just cruising shallow water, and big fish just kind of throwing caution to the wind and, making themselves real available.
Man, okay. I need to get after some of my Stillwater before this gets all said and done, and then make myself like a battle plan for next year, because there's so many great lakes, and they can hold such giant fish like you're saying. I'm really into that. I got to do more of that. So when you get to a lake, Derek, you talked about this one lake with this drop off where all of a sudden it drops off. Are you always looking to fish the deep side? And then are you looking to stand in one place, or do you work that whole bank of that deep side kind of walking and looking for those fish?
My game plan usually starts on Google Earth, and I kind of look at the lake and try and find something of interest. So maybe a rock point or a weed bed, somewhere that looks kind of swampy, like a spring is coming up in there, an inlet or an outlet of a river, something of interest. And then I typically start there. But every lake is different, but the same. I mean, if you're going from one river to the next, there's some big differences, but there's some similarities where, in a lake, for instance, a weed bed is always going to be a place to look at, or an inlet is always going to be a place to look at. A spring is going to be a good place, but, one lake from the next, they might hang out on a real deep side, and some lakes they hang out in super duper shallow water. Probably 3 weeks ago, I was out fishing a lake, and I ended up going into a little backside, and fish were in super duper shallow water. And to be honest, I'd never even walked over there on that particular body of water. And there were fish just in real shallow water. There were fish on the deep side as well, but I was surprised at how shallow some of those fish were coming up. They were moving off of a shelf, and they were sitting in a foot of water. And, so really, when it comes down to it, I make my game plan first, looking on Google Earth, trying to figure out where might be a good place to start. And from there, I just start putting in the legwork and walking around and stopping and scanning the water and really paying attention and looking for fish, looking for bugs. A lot of times when a hatch is going off, you'll see birds that respond to the hatch, and they'll start dipping and diving and feeding right along the water's surface there. And that's a good indicator that something's going on. So I'll go investigate something like that. But, it's different in every lake. But as you get to know lakes, there's certain similarities that are going to jump out at you, and you're going to instantly recognize, yep, there's going to be a fish there.
Yeah, that makes complete sense as you're talking about it. I can picture the spots that I have done good in lakes, and they are like springs, inlets, outlets, drop-offs. I like what you said about weed beds too. That's a huge food source for those fish, and so you're looking for those swampy weed beds, it sounds like. Are are you working you're sight fishing for these fish, so you're working these bank lines and looking. Is there a type of lighting or a type of day, since you are so reliant upon sight fishing for these fish, that you go, or you have a day to fish, you're just going to go out in the lake and make the best of it?
In the spring, the best days typically for me have been bright, sunny days.
Oh,
So
wow.
anytime, yeah, yeah, it almost seems a little bit contrary because as you get into the summer months, I typically do a lot better on dreary, dark, rainy days. And it's definitely harder to see the fish, but you also get bigger fish that will move out and kind of feed in that low light. But in those early spring months, really bright, sunny days typically produce the best for me.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. It is. It's counterintuitive, or I usually find so much good fishing on those cloudy, overcast days and good hatches. So yeah, that's good to hear. Do you find with Stillwater that these fish are more line shy or anything, that you really have to step down your tippet? Like, I'm used to, in these rivers out here, that the tippet doesn't really matter as much. But do you find it matters in this Stillwater where you really have to size down?
I don't know. I really don't think that tippet size plays much of a factor other than your sink rate and the way that your fly moves. But for me, if I'm using, let's say, like a size 10 damsel fly or something in a Stillwater, a lot of guys will size down and use 4x or something like that, and I will size up and fish maybe 1x, and I fish them on a loop knot. So when you use a clinch knot on a heavier line, it's going to kind of make the fly seem as though it's attached to a piece of wire, versus if you throw that loop knot on there, it allows the fly to move more naturally. And from everything that I can see, a fish sees, 4x or 5x just as well as it sees, 3 or 4, whatever. Those really small, fine tippets don't really make a difference. So, I can get away with fishing, let's say, like 2x or whatever versus 4x. I don't think the fish care. I think they see 2x and 4x the same pretty much.
Oh man, that's the best news you could have given me, Derek. I hate fishing small tippet. It seems like as the years go on, I fish heavier and heavier tippet, and there is a line of diminishing returns, but for the most part, I like fishing that same tippet you do. So I love to hear that, because that's the way I love to fish. And really smart, that loop knot. I mean, I'm just always still learning and evolving and on my own journey as well. And I fish streamers a lot, but I've really dove deep into it with, the swing and the spay rods and the single hand rod, and just, really working my angles and working my bugs and really getting into it. And that loop knot has made such a difference just in the way that streamer swims. So yeah, that makes sense on that damsel fly, that you would tie that loop knot, and it's got more live action on the water. It's not just like you described, like connected to a wire. It just makes that fly alive. And it seems like with streamers, I'm always looking at my bug in the water and just seeing how it's swimming and what it's looking like. And the more real, the more action it has, the more swim to it, the more eats I get, it seems like, And so, man, I can see where that would make a huge difference. But I'm really happy to hear that tippet is not a big difference maker.
Yeah, no, I've never found it to be a real big difference maker. If you're Euro nymphing or something where the tippet diameter is going to help you get deeper, then sure, I'm willing to go to a smaller size to try and get deep. But when I'm fishing a streamer or, a heavier nymph or something, I'm really not concerned about the tippet diameter. Occasionally on lakes where the fish are real spooky, I find that the length of leader is about the only difference, just because they're really keyed into that fly line dropping on the water. And in that circumstance where I notice that fish are maybe real spooky, I'll lengthen my leader out to say 14 feet or something like that, and just kind of go from there. But yeah, I don't find that tippet diameter really makes a difference at all.
Man, that's great to hear. I gotta get some of these. I gotta research and get some better damselflies. I haven't fished those, but they are all around lakes. They seem to hatch in that mud around those lakes, and a lot of those things around. Are those some of the better dry fly hatches you find on these lakes?
They definitely respond really, really well to damselflies, and they respond to them both while they're hatching and they're migrating from, deeper water and weed beds around mucky, nasty stuff, like you're saying, and as a dry. So when I try and target these lakes for a damselfly hatch specifically, I'll go out and try and get them when they're first migrating, and then I'll try and stay on that hatch for a couple of weeks. Because what will happen is you'll first get a small hatch where, just a few bugs here and there are hatching, and then the hatch builds and every day gets better and better. And then as there's a lot of adult damsels, then the fish will target those dry flies a lot. So, as the damsels are such a good food source for big trout that when they first start coming off, even though they're not big in number, the fish will key in on them. And the way that a damselfly hatches is it will actually come up from the muck and the mud, and it will start swimming towards the shore in the first couple inches of the water column. And they have this really wiggly movement as they swim. And trout can just see them from a mile away, and they key in on them, and they will move a long ways and crush that bug with, a lot of aggression. So you'll start to see these fish congregating around weed beds or, logs in the water, anything that those damselflies are going to come in contact with, and then they'll crawl up and hatch right there. So the fish will kind of patrol these areas looking for those damselflies swimming over to these areas, and they'll just intercept them, and they're real aggressive when they hit them. And so you get a couple weeks of that real aggressive nymph where the fish are just keyed in on that nymph. And then, you get kind of a mix over where they're starting to look at the damselfly dry and eat them right off the surface. But both the nymph and the adult are a blast to fish, and fish go crazy for them.
Man, that sounds like fun. So the nymphs, are you using those under an indicator, or are you throwing those out and kind of moving them around a little bit? Or I'm just trying to get at like how much these flies are moving under the surface.
Yeah, so when you very, very first start out and the damselflies are just starting to think about hatching, they're real active along the bottom of a weed bed or in the mud, or where there's a log or whatever, and they really like weed beds. But they'll come and they'll move down along the bottom, and during that time you can fish them either on an indicator down deep, just right close to the bottom, or you can fish them with a bead-headed fly or something where they're going to sink to the bottom, and you just kind of strip them right along the bottom. But as the hatch gets going, those fish just swim straight up from the bottom, and then, in those first couple inches of the water column, they just turn towards the shore and just start making a blitz for it. And those fish will just come right to the surface and patrol right along the surface when they're really starting to get hatching, and swimming towards, the structure and logs, weeds, rocks, whatever's sticking out of the water that they're going to encounter and climb up on and hatch. And so those fish will cruise back and forth in the real shallow water, or real shallow in the water column. And when I'm fishing that, then I just use a long leader, and I use maybe like a 1-inch long marabou fly that kind of almost like a woolly bugger, and just fish it with no weight or anything right below the surface.
Man, that sounds like fun. I like that. Yeah, I got to go investigate some of this Stillwater around here a little bit more. That sounds like a riot for those big fish. When you're stripping, like, I love that, like the 1-inch marabou. So it sounds like you like if you're gonna pull a streamer by them, you said you don't like it real big, so you're staying away from the 3, 4, 5-inch double articulating. And it sounds like you're going with like a smaller 2 to 3-inch single hook, maybe articulating, but with a lot of life to it, a lot of movement, it sounds.
Yeah, if I'm fishing the damselfly hatch specifically, then I'm going to go with a real small fly, maybe an inch, inch and a half long. And then if I'm just using a searching pattern, then I'm going to typically fish a smaller fly, 2, 3 inches in length, something that could be a leech. Maybe it's a dragonfly nymph. Maybe it's a bait fish. Nothing super descriptive like a woolly bugger or some kind of pattern like that can do really, really well. And only on occasion, or when I feel that there's a really big food source that those fish are keying in on, will I try and imitate a larger minnow with an articulated streamer. So here in Utah, we've got a lot of chubs, and chubs are, anywhere from, an inch long to 12 inches long. And I found that trout kind of like them in that 3-inch long size. And so when I encounter lakes that are full of chubs and I know the trout are keyed in on them, then I'll use that articulated streamer in a 3 or a 4-inch long streamer. But most of the time, I think that, trout are pretty willing, no matter if they've had a big meal recently, to eat something that's moving erratically that's an inch or 2 or so long.
Yeah, gotcha. Do you find it's color, or what are your favorite colors to use on Stillwater? What do you go with? Like, a lot of times I've seen these flies, that wouldn't work in the river, that are orange and red and things, that I've had some good lake fishermen, give me some ties and things. Are you using real weird stuff, or are you sticking with the basics, or maybe even sticking like more with white to imitate those bait fish?
White is one of my favorite colors, especially for a streamer. I do really, really well on white. If I'm fishing an articulated streamer, white is the first thing I tie on most of the time. Unless there's something specific where I'm, gonna fish a different color, white is my go-to color. And then from there, I really like dark brown and black and olive probably are, for the most part, my go-to colors.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, I almost do better in the rivers with like a darker color, but that may be also because we've got a lot of sculpin, so a lot of times that olive or that dark is a sculpin, which I guess white can be too, or the white and green we do really good on. But yeah, I like what you said about white. That's I like white and I try it, but I would say that it's my second or third choice on rivers, but it sounds like lakes, I've done better on white, it seems like. So I think I need to stick to that white. That's good to hear.
Yeah, white's a really good color, especially for kind of those articulated streamers and, streamers that are imitating bait fish. If I'm fishing something, like a woolly bugger, or a smaller, I have a little fly that I tie that could kind of be a damsel. It could be a minnow. It could be a leech or something. Then I'll throw it into olives and blacks, and dark browns will be my kind of first colors that I go to, just because it could be so many different things. And, if I'm fishing that inch long little streamer thing that I tie, then I move away from white a little bit. But yeah, white is typically my go-to color for articulated streamers, versus that smaller streamer I typically start in kind of an olive or a brown.
Man, way cool. I found this new streamer that's been doing good for me that's gray on top, white on bottom, like marabou fly. It's just got a ton of movement to it in the water. It just seems alive. Those fish really like it. It's this barely legal gray on top, white on bottom. I think it imitates a bait fish really well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great fly. I've used that quite a bit, and it does really well. And for me, like you're saying with the movement of the marabou, I think movement, especially when you're fishing something that moves a lot, like a damselfly wiggles like crazy in the water. A little bait fish is going to swim and dart all over the place. So when you really are trying to imitate something like that, movement to me is more important than color. If I have a fly that moves really well, even if it's not in the preferred color, I would rather fish that over something that maybe looks spot on, but doesn't move well.
Man, again, that's that argument. Presentation is the most important. So when you're presenting these flies in the lake, are you really changing up your strip, or do you do a strip pop, or are you trying to find what the fish are keyed in on, or do you like to strip really fast, or what's your approach when you're looking at your stripping speed?
It's pretty varied. The way that I approach things is I typically, in cold water right around ice off, am fishing really, really slow, and then I'll move it faster as the fish kind of tell me that they want it faster. So if I'm seeing fish and I'm fishing, a real slow strip and they just don't want it anymore, then I'll start putting some speed on it and seeing if I can trigger and eat. If I'm fishing a damselfly or a leech, then I go to typically a real short, small strip where, I might only be making a 1-inch long strip and then a short pause, and, I'm just inch long strip, inch long strip, inch long strip, and just kind of repeating that. Versus with a streamer, I will do, when I start off around ice off, I'll do one big pause, and then I'll do like strip, 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 pause, and let it kind of drift and sink and flutter a little bit, and then, a couple more strips, and start off real slow like that. And, when the water's cold, they seem to be a little bit more into that super slow retrieve. Their, metabolism's just kicking in big time, and, they're a little sluggish off the bat, but, that strip seems to get them.
Yeah, it makes complete sense. I know in the rivers, when it's colder, I get more on the swing, and as it warms up, I get more on the strip. So that makes complete sense to me.
Yeah.
Well, on your social media here, like lately, I've seen a couple pictures. I'm in love with Arctic Char. It sounds like I know you've been on adventures all over, but lately you've been talking about this trip up to the Arctic. Man, is that a wild place, just untouched, like a vast country. And I've spent some time up there caribou hunting, and then spent a couple days fishing the Sag River that's off the Hall Road there. Floated it and drifted. I couldn't get into any Arctic Char. I'm really trying to time it when they're up there, but I got to go out there and just really focus on those beautiful fish. Man, it looked like you had an amazing adventure out there.
The Arctic is like my favorite place in the whole world. It's just untouched, like you were saying, it is so pretty up there. And, between the different species of char that live up there, I just think they are so pretty. You've got the Arctic char and the Dolly Varden and, some lake trout up there. And even the lake trout up there are really super pretty. Their fins are really big. They've got a lot of orange colors in them, and they're just really beautiful fish. And yeah, I love the Arctic, and I love char, and I think they're about the coolest fish on the planet.
Man, how neat. I have to go up and target them more. So seems like the runs are happening like August, September up there with those Arctic char. Is that what you found coming into that Arctic?
Yep. August and September are good months to be up there, especially when you're dealing with sea run fish. So you've got, these sea run Arctic char will go out into the ocean in, let's say, the end of June when the ice breaks up, and they've got a real short window where they've got to be feeding and putting on the pounds, and they'll run out into the ocean and they'll feed real heavy for a couple months, and then they've got to turn around and come back into the lakes because up in the Arctic, the salt water will actually freeze. It gets so cold, and so the salt that's remaining will actually drop down, and the water that's left is a higher salinity, and the fish can't survive in that. So they've got to turn around and come back into the fresh water before it freezes. So you get a mass migration of fish that are coming in to overwinter in lakes and stuff. So if you time it right, you can hit it where the rivers are just chock full of Arctic char moving in back to their overwinter sites. So it can be pretty spectacular.
Man, I had no idea. Like, I thought they were, I guess I just haven't read that much into it or studied that much. But yeah, I thought they were coming up like steelhead, run into the river to procreate, and then they run back to the ocean. I had no idea that they spend the entire winter in lakes, and then I would imagine they spend them in rivers too, like the Sag. Does that start from I'm not sure if that even starts from a lake, so they could probably winter in those rivers just as well too, huh?
They can, yeah, as long as there's a consistent flow throughout the winter, anywhere that there's springs coming up and maybe a deeper section of the river where, you're going to get something that's 15 or so feet in depth, because that ice in the Arctic will freeze like 6-7 feet deep. And so they need some depth to be able to overwinter, or a spring where they're getting some consistent flow. But anywhere like that, you're definitely going to get Arctic char, sea run dolly, lake trout that can overwinter in the river.
Wow. Man, that is wild. Nature and its ability to survive. It just has these systems figured out for these different environments, and these fish that are perfectly adapted to the conditions, which you say when you really talk about it, and the ice, and then the sea freezing down, they can't winter in there. It's just it's amazing how these fish adapt. So when you go up to the Arctic and you're making big adventure fish up there, which is really in grasp for all of us to make it to Alaska and to that Arctic. What's your battle plan for up there? Have you studied a few different rivers and you're going to fly into some of these different rivers? You also taken advantage of some of the easy access off roadways and things down there? Or what's your battle plan when you're going up to the Arctic to go hunt some of these char and sea run dollies and things?
I've been super lucky. I've got to go up there 4 different times, and every time my game plan has been to read as much as I possibly can about any of the systems that I'm planning to target. And then I try and get as far away from roadways, towns, anything as possible, to where it's truly, truly untouched. And for me, the whole reason that I'm going up there is to be in one of the most remote places in the world. I don't want to see people. I don't want to see anything that has to do with people. I want to see a river system, a lake system that was as close to untouched as possible in its natural state. And so, I'm looking for places like that, and it takes a lot of research to figure out if fish are going to be there, if they're not going to be there, phone calls, digging on Google for information, looking at maps and seeing, does this lake and this river all connect into the ocean? How far away from the ocean is it? If I'm going after the sea run fish, is a fish going to be able to have enough time to feed and get big and come back in, so on and so forth. But yeah, I'm really looking for those places that are super remote, but have the possibility of having those big sea run fish, so that I can, catch what I would consider the fish of a lifetime.
Man, that's beautiful. Like you say, you're so immersed in like the entire experience. Like it isn't just going up there. Like you say, the fish of a lifetime is one thing, but you have to enjoy the entire process, like you do, the research, and then really trying to get away from people to have your own experience back there, this untouched, pristine place. And there aren't many places in the world that are that pristine and untouched. And then, yeah, I love your research, reading, and then probably talking to guys too. You mentioned phone calls. The pilots are pretty knowledgeable about where they can land and historic runs and things. Man, I've got a really good buddy up there that loves to fish. I've got to start planning one of those trips. I'm infatuated with those Arctic Char. They're just the most beautiful fish. That is really cool, Derek. What a great do-it-yourself adventure that you've been able to put together multiple times. Planning for another one up there?
Definitely. Yeah, I've got a couple of guys that are just begging me to take them up there. And I mean, anytime that I can make my schedule work and finance a trip up there, I am game, because I love nothing more than to go to different places up in the Arctic and explore new systems and just kind of see if the same is held true, that, if you find something that connects to the ocean and it has all the right makings, if there's going to be fish there. And so far, I'm 4 trips in, and it's worked out every time. It's been close a few times where we've struggled to find fish, but in the end, we've found what we were looking for. But, to what you're saying, the whole experience, it's more than just catching a fish. It's the whole thing, exploring, being in a remote place, do-it-yourself aspect that really just drives me to want to be up there, and I love it. It's totally unpredictable. It's totally wild. It's completely untouched. It's just an amazing place.
Yeah, what a great overall adventure. That is just wild, man. That is so cool. So, what are your tactics a lot of times when you're fishing for these? Are you swinging with the spey rod up there, or what are your tactics to catch these fish, or kind of look for them when you're trying to locate and find them?
I've swung as much as I could with the spey rod, but I didn't find great success in it, just because we weren't quite timed right for some of it. So I found that just stripping a bright colored streamer works really well. Pink has done well for us. Purples and pinks together have done well. Orange does okay, depending on the day and the mood of the fish. But really just kind of trying to get deep and stripping a streamer in areas where you think they'd be. And at times we found them in the river and been able to throw a fly kind of downstream and across to them. But, that's been kind of the exception, not the rule. So
Are you sight fishing and spotting those orange colors on that fish and then fishing to them, or are you doing a lot of blind casting with these bright colors and stripping through deep water?
We've done some blind casting, as we come to an area that looks good. But when the sun is right, you can see that orange color on those fish from a long ways away, and from really a deep. If the fish is sitting pretty deep, you can still see them because the water up there is so gin clear. You can see a lot. So when the sun's right, you can see those fish from a ways off.
Yeah, wild. So like nymphing techniques are like so effective on steelhead and the coast, and I love to swing for them. I use both ways, and so going down out of a boat, I'll nymph for them quite a bit. Like, is that, do you ever nymph for them up there, or you're just looking for those aggressive eats, or is that just the way you like to fish to those fish?
We've nymphed to them a little bit, and we've definitely caught some fish on nymphs, but I think the fish just are really looking, in their brain as kind of ingrained shrimp. And so kind of those pinky, orangey, shrimpy type colors seem to work really well. And purple, I don't know why they like purple, but for whatever reason, both Arctic Char and Dolly Varden seem to respond well to purple. And a strip and a streamer, I guess, just reminds them of chasing a little shrimp that's, those shrimp use their tail to kick backwards, kind of like a crayfish, and swim around is the only thing that I can think of. Maybe that's just ingrained in them to eat something that's moving in kind of a varied, hectic little fashion, and that seems to be the way that they eat it.
Man, yeah, that's what I find with steelhead too, is they live so much in the ocean, and it's so competitive for the food source, and they have to get so big that they're just chasing stuff down in that ocean all the time. And so like it's almost instinctual with those fish, where you get that bright color in front of them or get their attention, and they almost just go grab it instinctual, because that's what they've been doing in the ocean the whole time, it seems. That is so cool, man. That just sounds like such a wild adventure. Like, without getting too much into it, like, what do you try to budget for one of these trips? Are you going to fly into one system and fish it for a week, and it's just going to be you on that system? Or are you going to have that float plane take you to a couple different systems? And then, like what's a realistic budget for guys that are looking to do it and do all their own research?
It depends on the trip. Usually we only have budget for a one fly in, one fly out kind of thing. One time we did do a multiple location thing when we were going on a longer trip. But most of the time it's one in, one out. And if you contact the pilot, and the pilot will tell you, I can take, 3 guys or 4 guys or whatever it is with X amount of gear per person, then you can kind of budget, like, okay, the pilot's going to charge us $5,000 for the flight in and out. So between each of us, that's 12 or 11 $1,100 or $1,200 or whatever it ends up being, depending on the price of the pilot and where you're going. And then we budget in food, we budget in flights to get there. So typically we're trying to aim for about $2,500, $3,000 a person is kind of what we found is the price. If you really do your research first and call the pilot, price everything out, you can typically do it for around $3,000.
Man, that is awesome. Yep. Like you say, and a lot of hard work, a lot of effort. You're gambling a lot trying to find a place. Like, there's a lot of risk there too to get into that low amount, and that's why they charge a lot of money to go on those guaranteed places. But God, it's got to be so fun to do all the research and do it yourself, and then end up in a beautiful place like that and have it all to yourself with those fish in the system. Man, that is really cool. Yeah, I've got to put one of those things together. What an awesome adventure, man. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure to meet you and have you on the podcast, Derek. Man, this has really been fun for me. Thanks so much.
Yeah, no problem. I'm happy to do podcasts, and like I said earlier in the show, I feel like I'm the luckiest guy in the world. I'm super lucky to do what I love, super lucky to be out on the water as much as I am. So anytime that I have an opportunity to give back and share some of my knowledge, I feel like that's kind of my obligation, and it's my passion to share with other people. So, I'm happy to come on the podcast whenever and talk about whatever, as long as people are hopefully getting some benefit from it, then I'm game.
Man, they absolutely are. Yeah, this is really going to connect well with my audience. I know when I get fired up and I'm so interested, you just have so much knowledge and a great way that you deliver it. Man, you're just built perfect for podcasts and for helping anglers. So I love it. So guys can find you. Your social media is really good. Where can guys find you? Social media? Can you just give that out real quick, Derek?
Yeah, it's at Derek Olthuis. It's DerekOlthuis on Instagram. And then I run the Blackfin fly fishing channel on YouTube. And, a real quick thing for Blackfin, when I started out with Trout Academy, it was just a way to kind of give back, share my knowledge. And Trout Academy has remained mine, and I'm still going to run with that, but I'm working with a couple other guys to do Blackfin. We're doing trips and things like that, but we're really passionate about education. So we're going to be, as we kind of kick off this Blackfin platform, we're going to start reaching out to more guides and industry guys, and really try and pull together a good YouTube and Instagram channels and feeds where people can go and get knowledge from the best anglers, best guides in the world, and have a good place for people to learn from anglers that spend a lot of time on the water. So on YouTube, you can find me on the Blackfin channel as well.
Yeah, that's great. Unreal. Yeah, I'm gonna check out that Blackfin. I can't wait to check out some of your videos. Just some of the short clips that I see on Instagram get me so fired up. So yeah, gonna check out Blackfin. Thanks again for coming on, man. Just such a great guest. I'm gonna hit you up, next year or whatever, to come back on and share some info with us.
Perfect.
All
Perfect.
right.
I'm always game.
Cool. Thanks, Derek. I appreciate it.
No, thank you. It's been a pleasure.
All right, guys, that's a wrap. What a fun conversation with Derek. Thanks to him again for being on the podcast. Like I say, this has just been an amazing journey, being able to learn from a lot of these guys and put in play or put in practice a lot of the things I learn here on the podcast. So it has me fired up to go fish Stillwater. I might go look at a lake today. I'm just trying to get my podcast stuff done here. It's middle of the day, and hopefully can get out this afternoon. So great podcast with Derek. Make sure to check out everything we have going on over there at Eastmans. This week on the Eastmans Elevated, which is the hunting side of things, have on Ryan and Hillary Lampers. Just great people, great conversation back and forth. And Ryan is one of the most successful backcountry hunters I know. And he's good at it because he just loves adventure. He loves challenging himself and loves the wild places that it takes him. And so we're cut from the same cloth, which always makes for a fun conversation. So make sure to check that out. It's over at Eastman's Elevated. And also we're giving away that free bow over there at Eastman's Elevated. So be on the listen for that. You can find it over in the podcast or over on the Instagram social media. Post about it there today or so. And yep, we'll get this podcast out to you guys. Just a great recording. Really fun with Derek. Really fun doing this podcast. say fishing yesterday was pretty good. Swung up like maybe 5 or 6 fish. Caught the first 2, hooked the third one, and it was the best fish of the day. Came out of the water twice, and I lost him right there. I don't know what I could have done different. Had good side pressure, just a wild, feisty summertime brown trout. It's like, what are you going to do? You're just going to lose some of those fish. Had another big one chase me all the way. I threw it upstream and stripped back down in like this little pillow of water, like on my edge. That was this deep cut off grass bank. Stripping it back at me and just had a great big 22 to 24 incher turn and come down on it downstream. And I think I pulled it out of the water right as he was coming for it. Killed me, and then I couldn't get him to come up again. But it was good fishing, and will continue to be good fishing here. So I might grab a little lunch, and I'm going to get out, either fish some Stillwater, or I might go fish that river again. It's just coming into shape, so we'll go hit that. But thanks again to you guys for downloading this podcast. I'm really trying to make this thing go. Give you guys quality information to help you further your learning curve. And so I'm just going to continue to try to have these good next level guests on and try to talk in-depth fishing. So I hope you guys like it. If so, make sure you subscribe, rate and review. That really helps out. And also follow the social media. So appreciate the support, guys. And I'm going to go get after some fish, and I'll check in with you next week.